The Dominion Council chamber was silent, except for the low hum of the star map hanging in the air. 12 alien lords sat around a dark table, their eyes fixed on a small blue dot at the edge of the display. That dot was Earth. Lord Vesic Thorn, the oldest member of the council, stood up slowly. His skin was pale gray, and his eyes glowed a faint red in the dim light. He had lived for over 300 years, and in all that time, he had never seen a species as strange as humans. "They refused our terms," he said, his voice deep and cold. "We offered them peace. We offered them a place in the Dominion, as servants, as workers, as nothing more than a small colony under our rule, and they said no." A murmur went through the chamber. One of the younger lords, Kalira Voss, leaned forward. "Humans are weak. Their ships are slow. Their weapons are primitive compared to ours. Why does this matter so much to the council?" Vesic turned to her. "Because they destroyed the Krill outpost. 3 of our warships, gone. Not with better weapons. Not with more ships. They used tricks, traps, deception. They fought like animals backed into a corner, and animals like that are dangerous." The chamber fell quiet again. Everyone in the room had heard about the Krill outpost. It had been considered impossible to lose. The Dominion had ruled over 400 star systems for over 1,000 years, and no species had ever defeated one of their fleets in open battle. But humans had not fought in the open. They had waited, hidden, and struck when the Dominion ships were exposed. "So what do you propose?" asked another lord, a tall, thin creature named Dramus. Vesic smiled, though it did not reach his glowing eyes. "We send the reckoning." The room went still. Every lord at that table knew the name. The reckoning was the pride of the Dominion fleet, a warship larger than any city on Earth, built from the strongest metals in the galaxy, armed with weapons that could crack a planet's crust in a single strike. It had never lost a battle. It had never even been damaged in a fight. Some called it unstoppable, others called it a god of war. "The reckoning is meant for empires, not insects," Dramus said, though there was doubt in his voice now. "Then let it crush an insect," Vesic answered. "Let it go to their homeworld and burn every city they have built. Let it show every species in this galaxy what happens when they defy the Dominion. This is not just about Earth anymore. This is about fear. If Earth is allowed to stand after what they did, other species will believe they can defy us too." The council voted. It was almost unanimous. Only one lord voted against sending the reckoning, but her voice was drowned out by the others. Within a day, orders were sent to Commander Threxa Call, the captain of the reckoning, a warrior with over 200 confirmed void battles to her name. She had commanded warships since before some council members were born, and she had never once retreated. Threxa Call received the orders on the bridge of the reckoning, standing before a massive window that looked out into the black of space. She read the message twice, then handed it to her second-in-command, a broad-shouldered officer named Doran Vex. "Earth," Doran said, reading the name. "The world that destroyed the Krill fleet." "Yes," Threxa said. Her voice was calm, almost bored. "A backward planet. Primitive ships, no experience in real war. Then why does the council send the reckoning? Any lesser ship could handle this." Threxa looked out at the stars. "Because the council is afraid, and fear makes leaders do foolish things. But it does not matter. Whatever tricks these humans used against the Krill, they will not work against us. We are not some small outpost with a skeleton crew. We are the strongest ship ever built. Set a course for the Sol system. Full speed." The reckoning turned in space, its massive engines lighting up with blue fire, and began its journey toward Earth. 2 months earlier, and many light years away, a much smaller ship drifted quietly through a dense field of space debris and gas clouds, known as the Ashfall Expanse. This ship was called the Kestrel, a human vessel built not for war, but for exploration and survival. It was old, patched together from parts scavenged over years of conflict, and it carried a crew of just 12 people. But what the Kestrel lacked in size, it made up for in the mind of its captain. Captain Elena Reyes stood on the bridge, arms crossed, watching sensor readings scroll across the main screen. She was in her 40s, with short dark hair streaked with gray, and eyes that had seen more war than most people saw in 10 lifetimes. She had fought in the early years of the Dominion invasion, when Earth's fleet had been crushed again and again by superior alien technology. She had learned, the hard way, that humans could not win by fighting fair. Report, she said, without turning around. Her science officer, a young man named Marcus Chen, looked up from his console. The gravitational anomaly is still stable, Captain. It's exactly where the old research station left it marked. A pocket of space-time distortion, caused by the collapse of a dead star nearby. It's small, but it's strong. Anything that flies too close gets pulled in, and can't easily pull itself back out. Elena nodded slowly. She had read about places like this before the war, back when she was still training to be a pilot instead of a soldier. Natural traps in space were rare, but they existed, hidden pockets where the normal rules of movement and escape did not quite apply. Most ships avoided them. Elena saw something else. She saw an opportunity. How large is the affected area? She asked. About 200,000 kilometers across, Marcus said. Big enough to trap something enormous, if we can lure it in at the right angle. Behind Elena, her first officer, a stocky former Marine named Jonah Briggs, crossed his arms. You're really thinking about this, aren't you? Using this thing as a weapon. I'm thinking about survival, Elena said. You've read the same reports I have. The Dominion Council is furious about the Krill outpost. They're not going to send a scout ship or a patrol next time. They're going to send something big, something meant to make an example out of us. And you think we can catch a warship in a natural gravity trap? Jonah asked, skeptical. Captain, with respect, that sounds insane. It sounds insane, Elena agreed. Because it is. That's exactly why it might work. The Dominion doesn't think in these terms. Their ships are built to win through pure strength. They don't expect an enemy to use the environment itself as a weapon. We saw it at Krill. Their ships are fast, powerful, heavily armored, but not flexible, not creative. That's our advantage. Marcus spoke up again. Even if we do trap a ship here, Captain, what then? We don't have the firepower to destroy a Dominion warship, even a stuck one. Their armor could probably survive years of our weapons fire. Elena turned to face her crew. This was the question that had been keeping her awake for weeks. She had a plan, but it was still forming, still full of gaps that needed to be filled. We don't need to destroy it, she said. We need to disable it. Cut off its communications so it can't call for reinforcements. Damage its engines so it can't escape. And then we wait. We study it. We learn everything we can about their technology while it's helpless. And maybe, just maybe, we can turn their strongest weapon against them. The bridge was quiet for a long moment. Then Jonah let out a short, tired laugh. You know, Captain, when I signed up for this crew, I thought we'd be running supply missions and evacuating civilians. I didn't think we'd be planning to ambush the biggest ship in the galaxy. Things change, Elena said simply. Humanity doesn't get to choose easy problems anymore. We just get to choose how we face the hard ones. Over the following weeks, the Kestrel's small crew worked without rest. They mapped every corner of the gravitational anomaly, testing how objects moved when they entered at different speeds and angles. They dropped old satellite husks and broken drone parts into the field to study the pull, recording data every time something got caught and struggled to escape. Marcus discovered that the trap was strongest along a narrow corridor that curved gently through the debris field, almost like a hidden tunnel. Any large object entering that corridor at high speed would be pulled deeper and deeper in, unable to turn around in time before the gravity became too strong to fight. It's like a slingshot in reverse, Marcus explained one evening, showing Elena a holographic model of the anomaly. Normally, gravity wells fling ships forward using momentum. This one traps momentum instead. The faster something goes, the harder it is to escape once it's inside. So if a Dominion ship enters at full combat speed, chasing us, Elena began. It won't be able to turn back, Marcus finished. Not without slowing down first, and by the time its systems calculate that, it'll already be too deep in the field. Elena felt a small, grim smile form on her face. It was the first real piece of hope she had felt in a long time. But knowing the trap would work was only half the plan. The other half was bait. A Dominion flagship like the one the rumors described would not simply wander into the ashfall expanse by accident. It needed a reason to chase something directly into that corridor, at full speed, without hesitation. That reason, Elena decided, would be the Kestrel itself. We're going to provoke them, she told her crew, during a tense briefing in the cramped mess hall. We're going to make ourselves a target too tempting to ignore. A ship that humiliated their patrol forces. A ship that makes them angry enough to chase without thinking. Jonah frowned. That's a dangerous game, Captain. If we misjudge the timing even slightly, that warship catches us before we reach the trap. And you know as well as I do what happens then. I know, Elena said quietly. That's why we're going to need a lot of practice. And a little luck. For the next several weeks, the Kestrel ran drill after drill, simulating high-speed runs through the debris field, testing exactly how close they could let a pursuer get before diving into the corridor. They rehearsed until every crew member could execute the maneuver with their eyes closed. They repaired old weapon systems, scavenged for extra power cells, and reinforced the ship's hull as best they could with the limited resources they had. Elena also spent long hours studying everything Earth's remaining intelligence networks had gathered about Dominion warship behavior, especially reports from survivors of the Krill battle. She learned about their command structure, their tendency toward pride and confidence, their belief that overwhelming force always won. She began to build a picture in her mind, not just of Dominion technology, but of Dominion psychology. They think we're animals, she told Marcus one night, as they reviewed data together in the dim light of the science lab. They think humans fight with anger and desperation, nothing more. That's their mistake. We don't just fight with anger, we fight with patience. Marcus looked up at her. You really think this will work, don't you? Elena looked out the small viewport at the distant stars, thinking of Earth, of the cities that had already been damaged during the early years of the invasion, of the millions of people who were still waiting, still hoping that humanity had a chance. I think it has to, she said, because if it doesn't, there won't be another chance to try. Weeks later, sensors picked up the first sign of what they had been waiting for. A massive energy signature, far larger than anything the crew had detected before, entering the outer edge of the system. Marcus stared at the readings for a long moment before speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. Captain, I think it's here. Elena walked to the console and looked at the size of the signature glowing on the screen. It was enormous, dwarfing every ship description she had ever studied. This was not a patrol vessel. This was not even a standard warship. This was the reckoning. Elena straightened her shoulders, feeling the weight of the moment settle over the bridge. Every member of her crew turned to look at her, waiting for orders, waiting for confirmation that the plan they had trained for was finally about to begin. All hands to battle stations, she said, her voice steady, despite the storm building inside her chest. It's time to see if a trap, built by human hands, can catch the strongest ship in the galaxy. The Kestrel powered up its engines, and Elena Reyes guided her small ship out from its hiding place among the debris, directly into the sensor range of the most powerful warship the Dominion had ever built. The hunt was about to begin. Before the ship moved, Elena walked the narrow corridor toward the crew quarters, wanting to see every face one more time, before the plan began. She found most of them already awake, sitting quietly in the mess hall, no one eating much, everyone simply waiting. A young engineer named Sofia Alvarez looked up as Elena entered. She was barely 25, one of the youngest crew members aboard, though she had already proven herself brilliant with the ship's aging systems, keeping the Kestrel running long after most engineers would have given up on it. Captain, Sofia said, is it really out there, the big one? It's out there, Elena confirmed, sitting down across from her. Bigger than anything we've ever tracked. And we're really going to try to trap it, Sofia said, not quite a question. We're going to try, Elena said. I won't lie to any of you and pretend this is a sure thing. It isn't. But I've looked at every alternative, and every alternative ends the same way. Earth burns, and we did nothing to stop it. At least this way, we have a chance. Around the table, the crew listened in silence. Most of them had lost someone during the early years of the invasion. Sofia had lost both her parents when the first Dominion strike hit her home city. Jonah had lost an entire unit of Marines under his command during a doomed defense of a colony outpost years earlier. Marcus had lost his research station and half his colleagues when Dominion scouts destroyed it without warning. We're not doing this because we're not afraid, Elena said. We're doing this because we've already lost too much to stop fighting now. A quiet murmur of agreement went around the table. Jonah stood up first, nodding once toward Elena. Whatever happens out there, Captain, it's been an honor serving with this crew. Let's make sure it's not a eulogy, Elena said, allowing herself a small, tired smile. Get to your stations. It's time. As the crew dispersed to their positions, Elena paused for a moment alone in the corridor, resting her hand against the cool metal wall of the ship that had carried her through 3 years of war. The Kestrel had been through worse odds before, though never anything quite like this. She thought of Earth, of the cities still standing despite years of conflict, of children who had never known a world without war looming somewhere above them. She thought of her own daughter, Mia, safe for now in one of the underground shelters near what remained of Denver, waiting for a mother who had promised to come home. "For you," Elena whispered quietly, before straightening her shoulders and walking back toward the bridge. The weeks of preparation before this moment had not been easy. Early attempts at simulating the trap using scavenged debris had failed more than once, teaching the crew painful lessons about the anomaly's true limits. During one test, a large piece of an old satellite had been pulled in too quickly, smashing apart entirely under the gravitational stress before it ever reached the deepest point of the corridor. "If that had been us," Jonah had said grimly after reviewing the wreckage, "we wouldn't be having this conversation." Elena had ordered a full week of additional testing after that failure, refusing to move forward until Marcus could guarantee the Kestrel's own hull could withstand the forces involved in the maneuver. Marcus spent long nights reinforcing key structural points with salvaged plating, running stress simulations again and again, until he was confident the ship could survive a controlled pass through the corridor, even if a pursuing vessel could not. There had also been disagreements among the crew about the plan itself. Priya, usually quiet and reserved, had voiced doubts during one tense meeting. "Captain, even if this works exactly as intended, we're talking about provoking the single most powerful weapon the Dominion has ever built. What happens if they don't chase us into the corridor at all? What if they simply hang back and bombard us from a distance instead?" Elena had considered the question carefully before answering. "Then we rely on their pride. Dominion command doctrine, from everything we've gathered, values direct confrontation and overwhelming force. They don't hide. They don't play cautious games from a distance when they believe they hold total superiority. If anything, provoking them personally, making it feel like a matter of honor rather than simple strategy, should make them even more likely to pursue us directly." "And if you're wrong," Priya had pressed, "then we run, and we try again somewhere else," Elena had said simply. "But I don't think I'm wrong. I've studied every scrap of data we've gathered on their commanders. Pride is their greatest strength and their greatest weakness." The days leading up to the encounter had been filled with quiet tension, every crew member running through their part of the plan again and again, determined not to let a single mistake ruin months of careful preparation. Elena had barely slept, spending long nights alone on the bridge, staring at star charts and running calculations of her own, searching for any flaw in the plan that might have been overlooked. It was during one of those long nights that Marcus had found her, bringing 2 cups of the ship's weak, recycled coffee, setting one down beside her without a word. "You should rest, Captain," he had said. "Whatever happens, we'll need you sharp when the moment comes." "I keep running the numbers," Elena admitted, "looking for the mistake we haven't found yet." "There's always a mistake we haven't found yet," Marcus had said. "That's true of every plan ever made, Captain. At some point, we just have to trust the work we've done and be ready to adapt when reality doesn't match the simulation." Elena had managed a tired smile at that. "When did you get so wise?" "Around the 3rd time, we almost blew ourselves up, testing the anomaly," Marcus had replied, and for a brief moment, the tension on the bridge had eased into quiet, exhausted laughter. Now as the Kestrel moved out from its hiding place, engines humming to life, Elena thought back to that conversation, holding on to it as a small anchor of calm amid the storm of nerves building inside her. The plan was as ready as it would ever be. The rest was simply a matter of execution, courage, and no small amount of luck. On the main screen, the massive energy signature of the reckoning grew steadily larger as the 2 ships closed the distance between them, one small and human, built from scavenged parts and desperate hope, the other vast and alien, built from 1,000 years of conquest and unquestioned superiority. Elena settled into her command chair, gripping the armrests firmly as she watched the distance close. Somewhere behind her, she heard Sophia quietly checking engine outputs one final time, Jonah running through weapons diagnostics, Marcus monitoring the gravitational sensors that would determine whether their entire plan succeeded or failed, Captain, Marcus said quietly. Whatever happens next, it's been an honor. Elena nodded once, her eyes fixed on the growing shape of the reckoning on the viewscreen ahead. Let's give them a fight they'll never forget. The Kestrel surged forward into open space, small and defiant, carrying with it the last, best hope of a species refusing to accept defeat. The reckoning tore through the edge of the Sol system like a knife cutting through dark cloth. Its hull, kilometers long, was covered in glowing blue lines of energy conduits, pulsing like veins beneath gray-black armor plating. Commander Threxa Call stood at the center of the bridge, hands clasped behind her back, watching the star charts update as her ship closed in on Earth's home star. Status report, she said. Doran Vex, standing at the tactical station, glanced over the readings. We are 3 days from Earth, at current speed, Commander. Long-range scans show minimal defensive activity. Their remaining fleet appears scattered, likely still recovering from previous engagements. Scattered and weak, Threxa said, almost to herself, as expected. She had read the reports about the Krill outpost many times during the journey. She had studied every detail of how 3 Dominion warships had been lost to a species everyone believed to be primitive. At first, she had assumed the reports were exaggerated, perhaps a cover story for incompetent leadership. But the more she read, the more she noticed a pattern. The humans at Krill had not won through strength. They had won through deception, luring Dominion ships into unfamiliar terrain, using the environment against them. It was a clever tactic, she admitted, but cleverness only worked once. The Dominion fleet had already adjusted its protocols. Scans would be run continuously. No ship would enter unfamiliar space without full sensor sweeps. The Reckoning, above all ships, could not be tricked so easily. It was built with redundant systems, layered defenses, and sensors capable of detecting almost any anomaly from great distances. Commander, said a young sensor officer named Elith, her voice tense. We are picking up a small vessel, entering long-range sensor range. Human design, based on hull signature. Threxa turned toward the display. A single small ship blinked into view at the edge of the scan radius, far smaller than any Dominion vessel, drifting near a dense field of space debris, known in old star charts as the Ashfall Expanse. One ship, Threxa said, almost amused. Alone. Should we ignore it and continue toward Earth? Doran asked. Threxa considered this for a moment. Standard Dominion doctrine would suggest ignoring a single small vessel and focusing on the primary objective. But something about the situation caught her attention. This ship was directly in their path, close enough that continuing forward would bring the Reckoning within striking range regardless. Scan it, she ordered. I want to know what we're dealing with. Ilith's fingers moved quickly across her console. After a moment, her eyes widened slightly. Commander, the hull signature matches a ship listed in our intelligence reports. This is the same vessel identified in the aftermath of the Krill outpost battle. Human records refer to it as the Kestrel. The bridge fell silent. Doran looked toward Threxa, waiting for her reaction. Even among the disciplined Dominion officers, there was a ripple of tension at the mention of the name connected to their fleet's greatest recent humiliation. Threxa's eyes narrowed, though her voice remained calm. The very ship that destroyed 3 of our warships, sitting alone in open space, directly in front of the Reckoning. It could be a trap, Doran said carefully. Of course it's a trap, Threxa replied. The question is whether these humans truly believe such a small vessel can threaten a ship like ours. She turned to face her crew, a faint, dangerous smile crossing her face. Let us find out how far their arrogance extends. Prepare weapons. Move to intercept. On board the Kestrel, Elena watched the massive warship shift course, angling directly toward her position. Her heart pounded, but her voice remained steady as she gave orders across the bridge.
They've taken the bait,
she said. Just like we hoped. Or we've made a horrible mistake, Jonah muttered from his station, eyes fixed on the size difference between the 2 ships displayed on the tactical screen. The Reckoning was so large that the Kestrel appeared almost like a speck of dust beside it. Steady, Elena said. We stick to the plan. We don't run yet. We let them get close enough to commit, but not close enough to catch us before we reach the corridor. Marcus watched the sensor readings carefully. calculating distances every few seconds. "Captain, based on their current acceleration, they'll be within weapons range in approximately 4 minutes. Then we have 4 minutes to make them angry," Elena said. She opened a communication channel, broadcasting on a frequency she knew Dominion ships routinely monitored. Her voice was calm, controlled, deliberately provoking. "Attention, Dominion vessel," she said. "This is Captain Elena Reyes, of the human ship Kestrel. I don't know if you remember the name of my ship, but perhaps you remember what happened to the fleet we faced at Krill. I imagine the Dominion Council was quite embarrassed by that. Tell me, did they send their biggest ship because they were too afraid to send anyone smaller?" On the Reckoning's bridge, Threxa's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Doran glanced at her, waiting for a reaction, but Threxa said nothing at first. Instead, she opened a return channel. "Human vessel," Threxa said, her translated voice carrying cold amusement. "You speak boldly for a creature about to be erased from existence. Do you believe insults will save you where your tricks eventually will not?" "I don't need insults to save me," Elena replied. "I just wanted you to know exactly who is about to give your empire its second embarrassment this year." The channel cut off. On the Reckoning's bridge, Threxa's calm expression didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened. "I want that ship destroyed before it can attempt whatever pathetic scheme it has prepared." The Reckoning surged forward, engines blazing brighter, closing the distance rapidly. On the Kestrel, alarms began to chime as weapons lock indicators flashed across the console. "They're charging main weapons," Marcus said, voice tight. "Captain, if that thing fires at full power, we won't survive a direct hit." "Then we make sure it doesn't get the chance to aim properly," Elena said. "Jonah, evasive pattern Delta. Marcus, keep us just ahead of their targeting solutions. We need them chasing, not firing." The Kestrel banked hard, weaving through open space, as the Reckoning's forward weapon batteries began to charge, casting eerie blue light across the surrounding darkness. Threxa watched the human ship's erratic movements with growing irritation. "They're avoiding a direct engagement," Doran observed. "Running, not fighting." "Cowards," Threxa muttered. "Target their engines. Cripple them before they escape into that debris field." The Reckoning's weapons fired, streaks of blue energy lancing through space toward the fleeing Kestrel. Elena gritted her teeth as the ship rocked from a near miss, sensors screaming warnings. "That was close," Jonah said. "Too close." "Stay on course," Elena ordered, her voice tight but controlled. "We need them fully committed before we reach the corridor entrance." Another volley of fire streaked past, this time clipping the edge of the Kestrel's shields, sending a shudder through the entire ship. Sparks flew from a damaged console near the back of the bridge, and one of the crew members rushed to contain a small electrical fire. "Shields down to 60%, Marcus reported. "Captain, we can't take many more hits like that." "We don't need to," Elena said, watching the sensor display as the debris field of the ashfall expanse grew closer. "We're almost there." On the Reckoning, Threxa watched the human ship head directly into a dense cluster of space debris and ancient wreckage. For a brief moment, doubt flickered across her mind. Entering unknown debris fields was against standard protocol, especially without full sensor analysis first. But her pride, and her fury at being taunted by a species she considered inferior, pushed the thought aside. "They think hiding among rubble will save them," she said. "Follow them in. Full pursuit speed." Doran hesitated for just a moment. "Commander, sensor readings of that region are incomplete. There could be unknown hazards." "The Reckoning has never been stopped by hazards," Threxa said sharply. "It will not be stopped today by rubble and false courage. Pursue." The massive warship altered course, following the smaller human vessel directly into the debris field, engines roaring at full combat speed. Behind it, the stars seemed to blur as the Reckoning committed fully to the chase. Unaware that it was flying directly into the narrow gravitational corridor the Kestrel's crew had mapped so carefully during their weeks of preparation. On the Kestrel's bridge, Elena watched the readings with intense focus, every muscle in her body tense. This was the most dangerous part of the plan. If she guided her ship too far into the corridor too quickly, the Reckoning might notice the trap and slow down in time to avoid it. If she moved too slowly, the massive warship's weapons might finally land a fatal blow. "Steady," she whispered to herself as much as to her crew. "Steady." The Kestrel weaved carefully along the exact path Marcus had calculated weeks earlier, threading between chunks of ancient wreckage and dense gas clouds. Behind them, the Reckoning followed exactly as predicted, its massive engines unable to slow quickly enough to match the smaller ship's precise turns. "Captain," Marcus said, voice trembling slightly with anticipation, "gravitational readings are spiking. We're entering the strongest part of the anomaly." "Hold course," Elena said. "Just a little further." Behind them, alarms began to blare on the Reckoning's bridge. Elith's eyes widened as she stared at her console. "Commander, gravitational distortion detected. It's far stronger than anything in our star charts." Threxa's confident expression finally cracked. "Explain." I don't understand it fully," Elith stammered. "It's some kind of natural anomaly, but the pull is increasing rapidly the deeper we go. Our navigational systems are struggling to calculate an escape trajectory." "Reverse engines," Threxa ordered immediately. "Full stop, now." The massive warship's engines roared as they attempted to slow the ship's momentum, but it was too late. The Reckoning had entered the trap at full combat speed, exactly as Elena had hoped, and the gravitational pull of the anomaly had already begun to overpower its ability to turn back. On the Kestrel, Marcus let out a shaky breath as he watched the readings. "Captain, they're caught. The Reckoning is caught in the trap." Elena closed her eyes for a brief moment, relief and fear mixing together in her chest. The first, most dangerous part of her plan had worked, but she knew, deep down, that the real fight was only just beginning. "Bring us around," she said quietly. "Let's see how the strongest warship in the galaxy handles being trapped." Behind them, the Reckoning shuddered, as its engines fought uselessly against the invisible force pulling it deeper into the anomaly. Alarms blaring across every deck, as Threxa Call, for the first time in over 200 battles, felt something she had never truly felt before. Doubt. Deep within the Reckoning, far from the bridge, chaos of a different kind was unfolding. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Vantar Osk stood before a wall of failing readouts, watching in horror as the ship's primary drive core strained against forces it had never been designed to handle. "The stabilizers can't compensate," Vantar shouted to his team over the blaring alarms. "Reroute auxiliary power to the inertial dampeners before we lose structural integrity along the lower decks." Crew members scrambled across the engine room, pulling levers and adjusting controls as sparks rained down from an overloaded conduit near the ceiling. One young technician, barely out of training, stared at his console in confusion. "Sir, I've never seen readings like this," he said. "It's like the ship is being pulled apart in 100 directions at once, but nothing's actually breaking." "That's the anomaly," Vantar said grimly. "It's not trying to destroy us, it's trying to hold us. There's a difference, and right now, I'm not sure which one is worse." On the bridge above, Threxa listened to the engineering report streaming in, her expression darkening with each passing update. The Reckoning, a ship built to withstand direct weapons fire from entire enemy fleets, was being brought to a standstill not by weapons at all, but by the simple, patient physics of a dead star's gravity well. "Commander," Doran said quietly, approaching her side, "the crew is unsettled. Many of them have never experienced anything like this. The Reckoning has always been seen as untouchable. This is testing more than just our engines." Threxa understood exactly what he meant. Discipline aboard a Dominion warship depended heavily on the crew's absolute confidence in their vessel's superiority. That confidence was the foundation upon which 200 years of unbroken victories had been built. Now, for the first time, that foundation had cracked. "Assemble the senior officers," Threxa said. "I want a full status report within the hour. And Doran, make sure word does not spread through the lower decks faster than we can control it. Panic will do more damage to this ship right now than any human weapon." "Understood, Commander." As Doran moved to carry out her orders, Threxa remained alone at the viewport, staring out at the debris field surrounding her trapped ship. She thought back over the past decade of her career, the battles she had won, the species she had helped bring under Dominion rule, the absolute certainty she had always carried into every engagement. None of it had prepared her for this. She found herself replaying the human captain's words over and over in her mind. "I imagine this isn't how you expected your day to go." There had been no fear in that voice, only calm, almost amused confidence, the voice of someone who had planned for exactly this moment, and was not the least bit surprised it had arrived. Who were these creatures, she wondered, that they could face a ship like the Reckoning without trembling? Hours passed as both ships settled into an uneasy standoff. Aboard the Kestrel, Elena watched carefully, as her sensors tracked increasingly desperate attempts by the Reckoning's engineering crews to stabilize their trapped vessel. Every so often, the massive warship's engines would flare brightly as it attempted another maneuver, only to be pulled back by the relentless grip of the anomaly. "They're testing different approaches," Marcus reported, watching the patterns with fascination, even amid the tension. Full reverse thrust, lateral movement, even attempting to use their weapons as makeshift propulsion, by firing away from their direction of travel. Nothing's working. "How long can they keep trying before something breaks?" Jonah asked. "Hard to say," Marcus admitted. "Their engineering is far more advanced than anything human, but even advanced engineering has limits. If they keep pushing that hard against the pull, they risk damaging their own systems from the strain alone." Elena studied the readings carefully, weighing the risks of their current position. "We need to be careful here. If their ship starts breaking apart from stress, rather than being properly disabled, we could end up dealing with an even more unpredictable situation. Debris, radiation leaks, uncontrolled weapons discharge. I want constant monitoring of their structural integrity. The moment something looks critical, we pull back to a safer distance." "Understood, Captain," Marcus said, adjusting his sensors accordingly. As the hours stretched on, Elena found herself reflecting on just how strange this entire situation had become. She had spent years running from Dominion ships, watching helplessly as they destroyed everything in their path with terrifying, effortless power. Now, for the first time, she was watching one of those same ships struggle, trapped and vulnerable, its crew scrambling just to survive rather than conquer. It was a small victory, she reminded herself. A single trapped ship did not win a war. But it was proof, undeniable proof, that the Dominion could be beaten, that their strength was not absolute, that humanity's ingenuity could still matter in a galaxy that had long ago decided their species was insignificant. "Captain," Priya said from the communication station, "I'm picking up fragments of internal chatter from the Reckoning. Their communication array is damaged, but some short-range signals are leaking through. It sounds like arguments, different officers proposing different solutions." "Can you make out anything specific?" Elena asked. "Not clearly," Priya said, "but it doesn't sound like a unified crew right now. It sounds like people scared and confused, same as any of us would be in their position." Elena considered this information carefully. Even the mightiest warship, it seemed, was crewed by beings capable of fear and uncertainty, when their assumptions about their own invincibility were shattered. It was a valuable realization, one she intended to remember for whatever battles lay ahead. As night cycles settled over the Kestrel, most of the crew took turns resting, while others maintained careful watch over the trapped Dominion warship. Elena remained on the bridge long after her shift technically ended, unable to fully relax, while so much still hung in the balance. Jonah found her there in the dim emergency lighting, staring at the massive silhouette still visible through the viewport. "You should sleep, Captain," he said gently. "We've got people watching the sensors. Nothing's going to change dramatically in the next few hours." "I know," Elena said. "I just keep thinking about what happens next. We've caught them. But catching a monster, and knowing what to do with it, are two very different problems." Jonah settled into the seat beside her. "For what it's worth, I think we've already done more than most people would have believed possible. Whatever happens from here, we've proven something important." Elena nodded slowly, though the weight of responsibility still pressed heavily on her shoulders. Somewhere out there, an alien commander was staring at her own crew, wondering the same uncertain questions about what would come next. Two captains, two crews, both caught in a moment neither had ever expected to face, waiting to see which side would find a way forward first. Alarms echoed through every corridor of the Reckoning. Red emergency lights pulsed along the walls as crew members rushed between stations, trying to understand what was happening to their ship. On the bridge, Threxa Kahl stood rigid, watching as her engineers struggled to make sense of the readings pouring in from every system. "Report," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the noise. Doran Vex looked up from his console, his usually confident expression now tight with concern. "Main engines are at full power, Commander, but our forward momentum has stopped completely. Something is holding us in place." Gravitational anomaly, Illith added quickly. It's not just slowing us down, it's actively pulling us deeper into the debris field, no matter which direction we try to move. Threxa walked to the main viewport, staring out at the swirling field of ancient wreckage and dust surrounding her ship. From the outside, nothing seemed unusual. No visible walls, no obvious barriers, and yet the most powerful warship in the Dominion fleet was trapped as surely as if it had been caught in a physical net. "This is not possible," she said quietly. "Commander, our sensors detected something similar in preliminary data," Illith said, pulling up old readings from before the pursuit began. "A natural distortion caused by a collapsed star nearby. We simply did not have time to analyze it fully before entering." Threxa's hands tightened into fists at her sides. She had let her pride guide her into a trap, exactly as the human woman had likely intended. The realization burned worse than any wound she had taken in battle. "Communications," she said. "Contact Dominion Command. Inform them of our situation and request immediate reinforcement." A young communications officer worked quickly at his console, then looked up with a pale expression. "Commander, our long-range communication array isn't responding. I'm reading interference, but not from any weapon system I recognize." "Explain," Threxa demanded. "I believe it's connected to the anomaly itself," the officer said. "The same distortion pulling us in seems to be disrupting our ability to send signals beyond the debris field." The bridge fell into a heavy, tense silence. For the first time in the ship's long history, the reckoning was cut off, unable to move, unable to call for help, trapped deep within a hostile and unfamiliar region of space. "Then we will simply have to fight our way clear," Threxa said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Target the human ship. If they set this trap, perhaps destroying them will disrupt whatever mechanism they use to create it." "Commander, the anomaly appears to be a natural phenomenon, not something artificially generated," Illith said carefully. "Destroying the human vessel may not release us." "Then we will destroy them anyway," Threxa said coldly. "And then we will find another way out." Outside the wounded warship, the Kestrel drifted at a careful distance, well outside the deepest pull of the gravitational trap. Elena watched the massive ship struggle against invisible forces, her chest tight with a strange mixture of triumph and fear. They had done what seemed impossible only weeks earlier, but the fight, she knew, was far from finished. "Captain, their weapons are charging," Marcus warned, watching data stream across his console. "It looks like they're preparing to fire directly at us." "Range?" Elena asked. "Within striking distance, but their aim is unstable. The gravitational pull seems to be interfering with their targeting systems too." Elena allowed herself a small, grim smile. "Good. Let's make sure it stays that way. Jonah, keep us moving." Random evasive patterns. Stay near the edge of the anomaly, where the pull is weaker for us, but strong enough that any shot fired has to fight against the same distortion affecting their aim. The Kestrel shifted position smoothly, staying just outside the deadliest part of the trap, while remaining close enough to continue observing the crippled warship. Moments later, brilliant streaks of blue energy erupted from the Reckoning's weapon batteries, but the shots veered wildly off course, some striking harmlessly into the debris field, others dissipating entirely as the anomaly's strange gravitational effects bent their trajectories. "Direct hits, 0, Marcus reported, relief clear in his voice. "Captain, I don't think they can hit us accurately while trapped like this." "Then it's time to move to the next phase," Elena said. She turned to her communications officer, a quiet young woman named Priya Nair, who had barely spoken during the tense pursuit. "Priya, open a channel to the Reckoning. Let's see if Commander Kal is ready to talk." The channel opened, and Elena's voice carried clearly onto the bridge of the massive, immobilized warship. "Commander Kal," Elena said, "I imagine this isn't how you expected your day to go." On the Reckoning, Threxa's eyes blazed with fury as she stared at the small human vessel on her view screen. "You will pay for this insult, human. Once we break free of this trap, I will personally ensure your ship is torn apart piece by piece." "That's assuming you break free," Elena replied calmly. "From what I understand about gravitational anomalies like this one, escaping requires either far more power than a single ship's engines can generate, or careful navigation along a very specific path, one that took my crew weeks to map. Do you have that kind of time, Commander? Or that kind of patience?" Threxa said nothing, her jaw clenched tight. Doran glanced nervously between his commander and the communication display, unsure whether to speak. "I'll be honest with you," Elena continued. "We don't have the firepower to destroy a ship like yours, not even trapped as you are. Your armor is far too strong for our weapons. But we don't need to destroy you. We just need you to stay exactly where you are, while we study your ship's systems from a safe distance. Every hour, you remain trapped. My scientists learn a little more about Dominion technology. Technology that will help humanity defend itself the next time your empire decides to send a warship to our home. You believe you can simply observe us like some captured animal," Threxa snapped. "The Reckoning is not some helpless creature for you to study." "No," Elena agreed. "But right now, it's not doing much else, is it?" The channel went silent as Threxa struggled to control her anger. She looked to her crew, searching their faces for any sign of a solution, but found only worried, uncertain expressions staring back. "Cut the channel," she said finally, her voice tight. The communication ended, and Threxa turned to Doran. "Options. Now." Doran hesitated before speaking. "Commander, if the human woman is telling the truth about needing careful navigation to escape, our best chance may be analyzing the same anomaly data they used to trap us. If we can calculate a safe path, we could potentially use our own engines to break free, slowly, rather than fighting the pull directly." "How long would that take?" Threxa asked. "Given the complexity of the readings, and the disruption to our systems." "Days, perhaps longer." Threxa closed her eyes for a brief moment, forcing herself to remain calm despite the fury and humiliation burning inside her. She had commanded the Reckoning with pride, for over a decade, confident in its power, confident in her own skill as a warrior. Now she found herself trapped by a ship, a fraction of the size of her own, outmaneuvered not through superior weapons, but through patience and clever use of the environment itself. "Begin the calculations," she said finally, "and find a way to restore our communication array. Regardless of how long it takes, the Dominion Council must learn what has happened here." As her crew worked feverishly at their stations, Threxa remained standing at the viewport, staring out at the swirling debris field and the small, defiant human ship drifting just beyond her reach. For the first time in her long career, she found herself truly studying an enemy, not with contempt, but with something closer to grudging respect. "Doran," she said quietly, almost to herself, "tell me honestly, do you think we underestimated them?" Doran hesitated before answering. "I think, Commander, that we underestimated how far desperation can push a species willing to fight for its survival." Threxa said nothing more, but the words settled heavily in her mind as she turned back to watch her engineers work, the weight of her ship's helplessness pressing down on her like a physical force. Aboard the Kestrel, Elena finally allowed herself a moment to breathe, sinking into her command chair as the immediate tension of the confrontation eased slightly. Around her, the bridge crew exchanged exhausted, relieved glances, though no one dared celebrate too openly. The Reckoning was trapped, but far from defeated, and everyone on board understood how quickly the situation could still turn against them. "Captain," Marcus said quietly, "sensor readings suggest they're already trying to calculate an escape route using the same anomaly data we used to trap them." "I expected as much," Elena said. "They're intelligent, disciplined, and they have far more raw computing power than we do. Given enough time, they'll likely figure out a way to navigate free, even if it takes days." "Then what's our next move?" Jonah asked. Elena stood, walking slowly toward the viewport, looking out at the massive, trapped warship drifting silently in the dark. "We use whatever time we have wisely. Marcus, I want every scanner we have focused on studying their hull composition, energy signatures, weapon systems, anything that might help us understand how to fight ships like this in the future." "And if they manage to break free before we're finished?" Priya asked. Elena turned back to face her crew, her expression calm but resolute. "Then we make sure we're ready to run before that happens. But for now, we have a rare opportunity most humans could only dream of. The chance to study our enemy's greatest weapon up close, without it being able to fight back." She looked once more at the massive silhouette of the Reckoning, trapped among the ancient wreckage of the ashfall expanse, and felt a small, cautious flicker of hope rising in her chest. The hardest part of the plan was over, but the most important part, learning enough to change the course of humanity's fight for survival, was only just beginning. On the second day of the standoff, something unexpected happened. Marcus, running a routine sweep of the Reckoning's outer hull for structural weak points, noticed a small, unusual energy signature near what appeared to be an escape pod bay along the warship's lower section. "Captain, you should see this," he said, calling Elena over to his console. "It looks like an escape pod, separated from the main hull. Small, drifting just outside the deepest part of the anomaly's pull." Elena studied the readings. "Life signs? 1," Marcus confirmed. "Faint, but present." Elena frowned, considering the implications. Any idea why a single pod would separate now, in the middle of everything happening? "Could be an accident," Jonah offered. "Damage from the gravitational stress could have triggered an automatic ejection somewhere. Or it could be intentional," Elena said. "Someone trying to escape. Maybe someone who disagreed with how their commander is handling the situation." The crew exchanged uncertain glances. Rescuing a Dominion crew member carried obvious risks, but leaving someone to die slowly in a drifting pod, whatever their species, sat uneasily with everyone aboard the Kestrel. "Bring it in," Elena decided finally. "Carefully. If it's a trap, we'll deal with it. But I won't leave someone stranded out there without at least trying to help." The recovery took nearly an hour, Jonah personally overseeing the delicate process of guiding the small pod into the Kestrel's cramped cargo bay, using the ship's aging tractor beam system. When the pod's hatch finally opened, the crew found not a soldier or officer, but a young Dominion engineer, barely more than a cadet, curled against the wall of the pod, clearly terrified. "Please," the young alien said in halting, translated words. "Do not harm. Malfunction. Not attack." Elena stepped forward slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. "We're not going to hurt you. What's your name?" "Ryle," the young engineer said, still trembling. "Junior systems technician, 3rd class." Over the following hours, as ship's medic Dr. Amara Osei carefully checked Ryle for injuries, the young Dominion crew member slowly began to relax enough to speak more freely, revealing details about life aboard the Reckoning that painted a far more complicated picture than Elena had expected. "Not everyone believes in Council's cause," Ryle admitted quietly during one conversation with Elena. "Some serve because no other choice. Conscripted from conquered worlds. My homeworld, taken by Dominion 2 generations ago. Serve or family suffers." Elena felt a chill run through her at this admission. She had always imagined the Dominion as a unified, willing force of conquest. Every soldier a true believer in their empire's superiority. The idea that many crew members, perhaps even most, served not out of loyalty, but out of fear and coercion, opened up possibilities she hadn't fully considered. "Is that common?" she asked. "Crew members serving out of obligation rather than choice?" Ryle hesitated before answering. "Very common. Dominion. Large. Many species. Many worlds. Not all. Willing." This revelation sparked something in Elena's mind, an idea that began forming slowly over the following hours, as she considered the true nature of the enemy they faced. Perhaps the Dominion was not the single unified force of pure malice she had always imagined, but something more fractured, more complicated, an empire held together as much by fear and control as by genuine strength. "Marcus," she said later, gathering her senior crew for an update, "I think we've been thinking about this fight too simply. We've been treating the Dominion as one enemy, unified and unbreakable. But if what Ryle is telling us is true, there might be more cracks in their foundation than we realized." "You're thinking about more than just this one ship," Jonah said, understanding immediately. "I'm thinking about the whole war," Elena admitted. "If species across their empire serve unwillingly, out of fear rather than loyalty, that's a weakness far bigger than any gravity trap. That's something that could shift the entire balance of this conflict, if we ever find a way to reach those unwilling servants and offer them another choice." It was an idea far beyond the scope of their current mission, but Elena filed it away carefully, another piece of the larger puzzle she had spent years trying to solve. Ryle, meanwhile, remained cautious around the human crew, though the young engineer's fear slowly gave way to genuine curiosity. During one long conversation with Marcus in the science lab, Ryle asked hesitantly about human history, human motivations, why a species so clearly outmatched in raw military strength continued fighting rather than accepting Dominion rule, as so many other conquered worlds eventually had. Because giving up isn't really living, Marcus tried to explain. Even if the odds are bad, even if the fight seems impossible, most of us would rather struggle for the chance at freedom than accept comfortable slavery. Ryle considered this for a long moment. Strange philosophy, the young engineer finally said. But, perhaps not so strange. Many on reckoning. Admire what happened at Krill, quietly. Never say aloud. This small comment stuck with Elena long after the conversation ended. A tiny crack of doubt planted within the Dominion's own ranks. Proof that even among their enemies, humanity's stubborn resistance had not gone unnoticed or entirely unadmired. As the third day of the standoff wore on, with the Reckoning's engineers still working desperately to calculate a safe escape route, Elena found herself studying Ryle's information alongside Marcus's technical data, building a more complete picture of the enemy they faced, not just as a military threat, but as a complex, fractured empire, held together by forces far more fragile than raw strength alone. Whatever happened next, whether the Reckoning escaped peacefully or the standoff ended in violence, Elena knew this encounter had already changed something important. Humanity's understanding of their enemy would never be quite the same again. That evening, Elena called a quiet meeting with just Marcus and Jonah in the small briefing room near the bridge, wanting to discuss Ryle's information away from the rest of the crew until she had a clearer sense of what to do with it. If what Ryle says is true, she began, then the Dominion isn't just an army. It's an empire, held together by force, made up of species who never chose to serve it. That changes how I think about every ship we've fought since this war began. Jonah frowned, considering the implications. You think we could actually turn conscripted crews against their own commanders? That seems like a stretch, Captain. Fear is a powerful leash. The Dominion clearly knows how to use it. I'm not saying it would be easy, Elena replied. I'm saying it might be possible. And possible is more than we had yesterday. Right now, our entire strategy is built around outlasting an enemy we assume is unified and endless. If that's not true, if there are cracks running through their empire that we simply never had the chance to see before, then maybe outlasting them isn't the only option anymore. Marcus leaned forward, arms resting on the table. There's something else worth considering, Captain. Ryle mentioned other conquered species serve the Dominion out of necessity. If that's true broadly, it means the Dominion's real vulnerability might not be their weapons or their shields at all. It might be trust. An empire that size, held together mostly through fear, is only as strong as its ability to keep that fear consistent. Cracks like the one we just saw, mercy shown to a frightened prisoner, could spread further than we'd expect. That's a long game, Jonah said. Years, maybe decades, before something like that could meaningfully shift the balance of this war. Most long games start with a single small step, Elena said. We took one today. Whether it grows into something larger isn't fully up to us. But I intend to make sure Earth Command hears everything Ryle told us, in full detail, so someone with a broader view of the war can decide how, or if, to use it. The conversation continued late into the night, the three of them turning over every possibility, every risk, every fragile thread of hope the day's events had uncovered. By the time Elena finally returned to her quarters for a few hours of restless sleep, her mind was already turning toward a war that looked different than the one she had woken up to that morning. Not smaller, not less dangerous, but perhaps, for the first time in years, slightly less hopeless. The following morning brought new urgency to the standoff. Marcus rushed onto the bridge just after the start of Elena's shift, his expression tight with concern. Captain, the Reckoning's engineering teams have made a breakthrough, he said. Based on the energy patterns I'm seeing, they've likely finished calculating a viable escape trajectory. If my estimates are correct, they could attempt to break free within the next 12 to 18 hours. Elena straightened in her chair, the weight of the coming moment settling over her once again. Then we need to be ready. Once they're free, we lose the advantage we've held this entire time. I want every scrap of remaining data collected before that happens. Full priority. Already underway, Marcus confirmed. Though there's a risk. The closer we get to their final calculations, the more precisely they'll understand our own analysis methods too. If they realize how much we've learned about their systems, they may adjust their technology before engaging us again in the future. That's a risk we accept, Elena said. Right now, surviving this encounter, and gathering what we can, matters more than protecting the secret of exactly how much we know. As the ship's systems hummed quietly around her, gathering the last critical pieces of information before the inevitable confrontation to come, Elena allowed herself one final look at the massive, wounded warship still trapped among the debris. Whatever happened in the hours ahead, she knew the encounter had already reshaped everything she understood about the war humanity was fighting, and the possibilities that remained, however fragile, for a future beyond simple survival. 3 days passed inside the ashfall expanse, and neither ship made a move to break the tense standoff. Aboard the Kestrel, the crew worked in careful shifts, gathering as much data as possible on the trapped Dominion warship, while staying alert for any sign that the Reckoning had found a way to escape. Marcus Chen had barely slept, spending most of his waking hours analyzing energy readings pulled from long-range scans of the massive ship. On the 4th day, he called Elena to the science lab, his eyes red from exhaustion but bright with excitement. "Captain, I think I found something important," he said, pulling up a series of complex readings on the main screen. "Their shield technology isn't as absolute as we believed. It's incredibly strong, yes, but it relies on a rotating frequency pattern to distribute energy evenly across the hull. If we could identify the pattern and time an attack to strike during a specific phase, there's a small window where the shields are measurably weaker." Elena studied the data carefully. "How small a window are we talking about?" "Fractions of a second," Marcus admitted. "It would require incredibly precise timing, and even then, our current weapons probably aren't strong enough to make a meaningful difference. But it proves something important. Their technology isn't perfect. It has patterns, weaknesses. If we can learn to read those patterns, ships like the Reckoning aren't as invincible as the Dominion wants everyone to believe." Elena nodded slowly, feeling a small spark of hope beginning to grow. This was exactly what she had hoped to find, proof that even the mightiest weapon in the galaxy had limits, limits that could eventually be exploited by a species willing to study and adapt. "Keep working," she said. "Every piece of information we gather now could save human lives in the future." As Marcus returned to his analysis, Elena made her way to the bridge, where Jonah was watching the trapped warship with a wary expression. "Any change?" she asked. "Nothing major," Jonah said, "though our scans suggest their engineers have made some progress, calculating an escape trajectory. If Marcus's estimates are right, they might be able to attempt a breakout within the next day or two." Elena felt the familiar tightness return to her chest. She had known this moment would come eventually. The question now was what to do when it did. Aboard the Reckoning, the mood remained tense and heavy. Threxa Call had barely left the bridge since the ship became trapped, watching over her engineers as they worked tirelessly to calculate a safe path through the gravitational anomaly. The humiliation of being caught by such a small, primitive vessel gnawed at her pride, but beneath that anger, something else had begun to take root, a grudging curiosity about the species that had managed to outmaneuver the Dominion's greatest warship. "Report," she said to Doran as he approached her. "Our engineers believe they've found a viable escape path," Doran said. "It will require extremely precise navigation, matching the exact route the human ship used when it lured us into the trap. If executed correctly, we should be able to break free within the next 20 hours. Threxa allowed herself a small, tight smile, the first genuine relief she had felt in days. "Then let us prepare. Once we're free, I want that human ship destroyed before it can escape, or warn its homeworld of what it has learned about us." Doran hesitated. "Commander, may I speak candidly?" Threxa glanced at him, surprised by his tone. "Go ahead." "These humans have shown remarkable ingenuity," Doran said carefully. "First at Krill, and now here. If we simply destroy this ship and continue our original mission to attack their homeworld without adjusting our strategy, we risk falling into further traps. Perhaps it would be wiser to report back to the Dominion Council first, sharing what we've learned before committing to further action." Threxa considered this for a long moment. Her pride urged her to dismiss the suggestion entirely, to press forward with the original mission and prove that the Reckoning could not be stopped by mere trickery. But the humiliation of the past few days had taught her something valuable, a lesson she had never expected to learn from a species she once considered beneath her notice. "Perhaps you're right," she said finally. "Overconfidence is what led us into this trap in the first place. It would be foolish to repeat the same mistake by rushing blindly toward Earth, without fully understanding what we're facing." As her crew continued preparing for the delicate escape maneuver, Threxa found herself unable to stop thinking about the human captain's voice during their brief communications. Calm, confident, entirely unafraid despite facing a ship many times the size of her own. It was a kind of courage Threxa had rarely encountered among the many species the Dominion had conquered over the centuries. On the day the Reckoning was scheduled to attempt its escape, Elena gathered her crew for a final briefing. The atmosphere on the Kestrel was tense but resolute, every member of the small crew aware that the coming hours would determine humanity's next steps in the ongoing war against the Dominion. "They're going to try to break free soon," Elena said. "When they do, we won't have the firepower to stop them if they choose to fight. Our best chance now is to make sure we've gathered everything we can, and prepare to retreat safely before they're able to bring their weapons back online at full strength." "What about everything we've learned?" Marcus asked. "The shield pattern data, the engine readings, all of it. Shouldn't we try to transmit it back to Earth Command as soon as possible, in case something happens to us?" Elena nodded, already prepared. "The moment they show signs of breaking free, we send a compressed data burst back toward Earth relay stations. Even if we don't survive what comes next, that information won't be lost." Jonah frowned slightly. "You're expecting a fight." "I'm preparing for one," Elena said. "But I'm hoping it won't come to that." As if in response to her words, alarms began to sound across the Kestrel's bridge. Marcus's eyes widened as he studied the readings streaming in from his console. "Captain, the Reckoning's engines are powering up. They're attempting the escape maneuver." Elena watched the massive warship on the main screen as its engines blazed brightly, slowly, carefully navigating along a narrow path through the gravitational anomaly. It was clear the Dominion crew had studied the trap extensively, mirroring almost exactly the delicate route the Kestrel had used weeks earlier to lure them into the field. "They're doing it," Jonah said, a note of grudging admiration in his voice. "They actually figured it out." Slowly, painstakingly, the Reckoning inched its way along the narrow corridor, its massive form dwarfing the debris surrounding it. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the ship fought its way free of the deepest gravitational pull, until finally, with a final surge of its engines, the Reckoning broke completely clear of the anomaly's grip. On the Reckoning's bridge, a wave of relief swept through the crew as sensors confirmed they were finally free. Threxa allowed herself a small breath of relief before her expression hardened once more, her focus shifting immediately to the small human vessel still visible on her sensors. "Target the human ship," she ordered. "Full weapons power." But before her crew could act, Doran spoke up urgently. "Commander, wait. Long-range sensors detect an incoming transmission from the human vessel, directed toward Earth. If we destroy them now, we risk them completing the transmission and warning their homeworld of everything they've learned about our technology." Threxa's eyes narrowed as she studied the tactical display. The human ship was already moving, engines flaring as it prepared to retreat from the debris field, clearly anticipating the danger now that the Reckoning had broken free. "Pursue them," Threxa commanded. "Do not let that transmission complete." The Reckoning surged forward, its massive engines pushing it toward the fleeing Kestrel with terrifying speed. On the human ship, alarms blared as Marcus watched their pursuer rapidly closing the distance. "Captain, they're gaining on us fast," he said. "At this rate, they'll be within weapons range before we can complete the data transmission." "Keep the burst going," Elena ordered, gripping the arms of her command chair tightly. "Jonah, get us moving. Full evasive maneuvers. We just need a little more time." The Kestrel weaved desperately through the remaining debris, buying every possible second as the massive warship closed in behind them. On the Reckoning, weapons charged and ready, Threxa watched the small ship struggling to escape, her mind racing through the events of the past several days. She thought of her own pride leading her into the trap. She thought of the calm, unshaken voice of the human captain, refusing to back down, even while facing a ship many times more powerful than her own. She thought of Doran's warning about repeating the same mistakes that had already cost the Dominion so dearly. "Commander, weapons are locked," an officer reported, awaiting your order to fire. Threxa hesitated, her finger hovering over the command console. The Reckoning's weapons could easily destroy the fleeing human vessel in a single strike. Victory, in the traditional sense, was well within her grasp. And yet, something held her back. Belay that order, she said finally, surprising even herself. Oren turned to her, startled. Commander? Do not fire, Threxa repeated, more firmly this time. Let them complete their transmission. The bridge fell into stunned silence, as her crew stared at her in confusion. Even Threxa herself was unsure exactly why she had given the order, only that something about the humans' relentless courage, their refusal to surrender even when facing impossible odds, had struck a chord deep within her that she did not fully understand. On the Kestrel, Marcus's voice rang out triumphantly. Transmission complete, Captain. Earth Command has received everything. Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her, though the danger was far from over. She turned toward the view screen, watching as the Reckoning continued its pursuit, despite having every opportunity to destroy them. Why haven't they fired? Jonah asked, confusion evident in his voice. Elena studied the massive warship for a long moment, an idea beginning to form in her mind. Open a channel, she said. Let's find out. The communication connected, and Elena's voice carried across the void toward the bridge of the Reckoning. Commander Kahl, I notice you've had every opportunity to destroy us, and yet you haven't. I have to ask, why? On the Reckoning, Threxa stared at the screen for a long moment before finally responding, her voice carrying a weight Elena had not heard in their previous exchanges. Because, Captain Reyes, she said slowly, I find myself wondering if destroying you would truly serve the Dominion's interests, or simply satisfy my own wounded pride. The two captains regarded each other across the vast distance separating their ships, neither entirely certain what would happen next, but both aware that something fundamental had shifted in the balance between their two civilizations. Before the channel closed, Elena made a decision that surprised even her own crew. Commander Kahl, there's something you should know. During your ship's time trapped in the anomaly, an escape pod separated from your lower hull. We recovered the occupant, a young engineer named Ryle. Silence stretched across the connection. On the Reckoning's bridge, Threx's expression shifted, something unreadable crossing her features. Ryle Dasik, reported as lost during the initial gravitational stress. The crew believed the pod was destroyed. They're alive, Elena said, frightened, but unharmed. We'd like to return them to you, if you're willing to accept that as a gesture of good faith. Doran leaned toward Threxa, speaking quietly. Commander, this could be a trick. Using the pod as bait to get us to lower our guard during a supposed handover. Perhaps, Threxa said, but she found herself, once again, believing otherwise. Everything about the human captain's conduct throughout this encounter suggested calculated honesty rather than deception. If Elena Reyes had wanted to trick the Reckoning, she'd had far better opportunities already. Moments when a single well-placed lie could have cost the Dominion warship everything. Arrange the transfer, Threxa said. Small shuttle, minimal crew, no weapons. And if it's a trap? Doran pressed. Then we will have lost one shuttle, Threxa said. A small price, compared to what we've already risked, simply by entering this system. The transfer took place hours later, a small, unarmed shuttle, from the Reckoning, approaching the Kestrel, at a cautious, deliberate pace. Elena personally oversaw the handover, standing in the cramped docking bay, as Ryle prepared to leave, the young engineer's earlier fear now mixed with something more complicated. Thank you, Ryle said quietly to Elena, before boarding the shuttle. For kindness, not expected from enemy. We're not your enemy, Ryle, Elena said. Not really. Your commanders made choices that put us at odds. That doesn't mean every individual serving under Dominion colors has to be seen the same way. Ryle seemed to consider this deeply before nodding once, a small, respectful gesture, before finally stepping into the shuttle for the return journey. When Ryle arrived back aboard the Reckoning, word of the human crew's unexpected mercy spread quickly through the lower decks, whispered between crew members who had spent their entire service believing humans to be little more than savage animals fighting without honor or reason. The story did not change everything, but it planted a seed of doubt that would linger long after the Reckoning departed the Sol system. As the fragile truce between the two ships continued, Elena found herself facing pressure from an unexpected direction. Earth Command, having received the data burst transmitted earlier, began sending urgent messages demanding a full report on the situation, along with instructions that grew increasingly forceful as hours passed without further updates. They want us to disengage immediately, Priya reported, reading through the latest transmission. Command believes continued contact with the Reckoning represents an unacceptable risk. They're ordering us to retreat to the nearest defended system and await further instructions. Elena read the message herself, understanding the caution behind it. Earth Command had spent years operating under the assumption that any direct contact with Dominion forces beyond combat represented either a trap or a fool's hope. The idea of a ship captain choosing to negotiate rather than flee or fight would seem, to leadership safely removed from the situation, dangerously naive. "They don't understand what's happening here," Jonah said. "How could they? We barely understand it ourselves." "I need to make a choice," Elena said, more to herself than to her crew. "Follow orders exactly as given, retreat now while we still can, or trust what I'm seeing here, and continue building whatever fragile understanding we've started with Commander Call." "What does your gut tell you, Captain?" Marcus asked. Elena considered the question carefully, thinking back over every interaction she'd had with the Dominion commander during the standoff. The measured restraint. The willingness to spare the Kestrel, despite having every advantage once free. The quiet admission of doubt in her own council's wisdom. "My gut tells me this might be the only chance we get to actually change something bigger than a single battle," Elena said finally. "But I won't force any of you to stay if you think the risk outweighs the potential gain." She looked around at her crew, each of them exhausted, worn down by days of tension and uncertainty, yet none of them moved to object. "We've come this far, Captain," Jonah said. "Might as well see it through." Elena nodded, grateful for their trust, and turned back to compose a careful response to Earth Command, one that acknowledged their concerns while explaining her reasoning for continuing the delicate dialogue a little while longer. Threxa, meanwhile, faced pressures of her own. Word had finally reached Dominion Command of the Reckoning's extended silence, and increasingly urgent inquiries began arriving through the ship's partially restored communication array, demanding explanations for the delay in Earth's destruction. "They're growing suspicious," Doran warned, reading through the latest coded message from the Council. "If we don't provide a satisfactory explanation soon, they may dispatch additional forces to investigate, or worse, replace your command entirely." Threxa studied the message carefully, weighing her options. She could fabricate a simpler story, perhaps claiming technical difficulties without mentioning the trap or the ongoing contact with the human vessel. It would be the easier path, one that protected her position and avoided uncomfortable questions from a council, unlikely to appreciate nuance regarding a species they had already condemned to destruction. But something about that option felt deeply wrong to her now, a betrayal not just of the truth, but of the strange, unexpected respect that had begun forming between herself and the human captain over the past several days. "Send the full report," Threxa said finally. "Every detail. The trap, the standoff, the exchange of information. Let the council decide what to do with the truth, rather than basing their decisions on a comfortable lie." Doran looked at her with evident surprise. "Commander, that could end your career, perhaps worse." "Perhaps," Threxa said. "But I did not survive 200 battles by hiding from difficult truths, Doran. I will not start now, especially not over matters that could shape the future of this entire war." As the message transmitted toward distant Dominion space, Threxa allowed herself a rare moment of uncertainty about what would come next, not just for her own future, but for the fragile, unprecedented understanding she had begun building with an enemy she had once dismissed without a second thought. That night, or what passed for night in the endless dark of the ashfall expanse, Threxa found herself unable to rest, walking slowly through the lower decks of her ship for the first time in months, past crew quarters and maintenance bays she rarely visited as commander. She found small groups of her crew gathered quietly, speaking in hushed tones about the events of the past several days. One young officer, noticing her approach, straightened immediately, clearly startled. "Commander, we did not expect you down here." "At ease," Threxa said. "I find I wanted to see how my crew was managing, beyond the reports that reach my desk." The officer hesitated before speaking honestly. "There is uncertainty, Commander. Many of us have never questioned Dominion doctrine before. The idea that the humans could trap us, that you chose mercy over destruction. It challenges things we've always accepted as simply true." Threxa considered the young officer's words carefully. "Does that uncertainty frighten you?" "A little," the officer admitted. But perhaps also, it makes me curious. My grandmother's world was brought into the Dominion 3 generations ago. I have never once questioned whether that was right. Watching you choose understanding over anger, even toward an enemy who humiliated us, makes me wonder about many things I never considered before. Threxa said nothing for a long moment, simply nodding once before continuing her walk through the ship. The conversation stayed with her long afterward, a small reminder that the choices made by a single commander could ripple outward in ways far beyond the immediate moment, shaping the thoughts and doubts of an entire crew watching closely for guidance on how to understand an increasingly uncertain universe. By the following day, both ships had exchanged nearly everything they were willing to share. Technical data traded carefully, historical context offered cautiously. 2 crews slowly building something neither had expected when the pursuit through the ashfall expanse first began. Yet beneath the tentative goodwill, both captains understood that the encounter could not last indefinitely. Eventually, the Reckoning would need to report back to Dominion space, and the Kestrel would need to return to Earth, carrying with it information that would shape humanity's strategy for years to come. "We should discuss what happens when this ends," Elena said during one of their final exchanges. "I doubt either of our governments will simply accept peace based on a single encounter, however meaningful it felt to those of us who lived through it." "No," Threxa agreed. "The Council will likely see this as an aberration, an unfortunate delay, before continuing their original intentions toward your world. I cannot promise my report will change their minds entirely. But it might buy us time," Elena said. "Time to prepare, time to grow stronger, time, perhaps, for cooler heads on both sides to consider alternatives to endless war." Threxa studied the human captain through the video feed, admiring, despite everything, the quiet determination that seemed to define this entire species. "You are remarkably optimistic, Captain Reyes, for someone whose planet has spent years under threat of total destruction." "Optimism is sometimes all we have left," Elena replied. "But it's gotten us this far. I don't intend to abandon it now." As their conversation drew to a close, both captains understood that whatever came next, whatever their respective governments ultimately decided, the encounter in the Ashfall expanse had already changed something fundamental between their 2 civilizations, a small crack of understanding in what had once seemed an unbridgeable divide. The silence between the 2 ships stretched long after Threxa's words faded from the comm channel. On the Kestrel's bridge, Elena studied the massive warship still hovering at the edge of weapons range, unsure whether to trust the sudden change in her enemy's tone. "Captain," Jonah said quietly, keeping his voice low, even though the channel was closed, "this could still be a trick. Get them to lower their guard, then strike when we least expect it." "Maybe," Elena admitted, "but something tells me that's not what's happening here." She opened the channel again. "Commander Call, if you're truly reconsidering your position, I'm willing to talk. But I won't pretend the past few days haven't left both our crews with good reason to distrust each other." Threxa's reply came after a brief pause. "A reasonable position, Captain. Perhaps more reasonable than either of us expected from the other." Doran leaned toward his commander, speaking in a hushed voice. "Commander, is this wise? Opening dialogue with an enemy vessel, especially one that just humiliated the Reckoning?" "Wisdom," Threxa said quietly, "would have prevented us from ever entering that trap in the first place. Perhaps it's time I tried a different approach." She addressed the channel once more. "Captain Reyes, I propose a temporary truce. Not out of weakness, but out of necessity. My superiors will demand answers regarding what happened here. I suspect your leaders will want similar answers. Perhaps it would benefit both our peoples to understand exactly what took place, rather than allowing pride and anger to dictate what happens next." Elena considered this carefully. She had spent years fighting an enemy she barely understood, following orders to survive against overwhelming odds, without ever truly grasping the reasoning behind the Dominion's relentless expansion. This was, perhaps, the first real opportunity to bridge that gap of understanding, however small. "All right," she said finally. "I'm willing to talk, but my crew and my ship stay ready to defend ourselves at the first sign of betrayal." "A fair condition," Threxa replied. "One I would insist upon myself, were our positions reversed." Over the following hours, an uneasy but genuine exchange began between the 2 ships. Threxa transmitted limited information about the Dominion's history, explaining how the Empire had expanded across the galaxy over 1,000 years, absorbing hundreds of species through conquest, believing that only through strength and unity under Dominion rule could true stability be achieved among the stars. In turn, Elena shared parts of humanity's own story, the wars fought on Earth long before the Dominion's arrival, the desperate resistance mounted after the invasion began, and the simple, stubborn refusal of her people to accept subjugation, even when facing forces far more advanced than their own. "You call it stubbornness," Threxa said during one exchange, her tone thoughtful rather than dismissive. "Among my people, such behavior in a conquered species is usually seen as foolishness, a refusal to accept an inevitable outcome. Maybe it looks that way from the outside," Elena replied. "But to us, it's not about denying reality. It's about believing that reality can still be changed, if you're willing to fight hard enough for it." Threxa fell silent for a long moment before responding. The Krill outpost, the Ashfall trap. Both accomplished not through superior weapons, but through exactly that kind of belief. "Something like that," Elena said. As the hours passed, both crews remained tense, but increasingly curious about one another, watching the unprecedented exchange unfold between their respective commanders. Marcus continued quietly analyzing whatever technical data Threxa allowed to be shared, careful never to overstep the boundaries of the fragile truce, while on the Reckoning, several officers found themselves studying the small human vessel with newfound curiosity, rather than simple contempt. Eventually, the conversation turned toward the question both captains had been avoiding, the matter of what would happen next. "My orders were clear," Threxa admitted. "Destroy Earth, and demonstrate to the galaxy the price of defying Dominion rule. If I return without completing that mission, the Council will likely see it as failure, perhaps even treason." Elena's chest tightened at the words, old fears resurfacing despite the tentative trust that had begun forming between them. "And what do you intend to do?" Threxa was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the stars beyond her viewport. "I intend to tell them the truth," she said finally, "that Earth's destruction was never truly within our reach, without cost far greater than the Council anticipated, that a full invasion would likely result in losses no Dominion leader could easily justify." "Will they believe you?" Elena asked. "Perhaps not entirely," Threxa admitted. "But the Reckoning's own logs cannot be denied. The Council will see exactly what happened here, whether they wish to or not." Doran, listening nearby, finally spoke up. "Commander, if the Council learns the Reckoning itself was defeated, even temporarily, by a single small vessel, they may see it as an even greater reason to send a larger force in response." Threxa nodded slowly, acknowledging the very real danger in her officer's words. "That is possible. But I would rather present them with the truth and the knowledge we've gained, than return with false victory, built on the ashes of a planet we underestimated." Elena listened carefully, understanding the risk Threxa was choosing to take, not just for her own reputation, but for the uncertain future of two civilizations, locked in a war neither fully understood. "For what it's worth," Elena said, "if there's any chance for peace between our peoples, even a small one, I think it starts with moments like this. Two enemies, choosing to talk instead of simply destroying each other." Threxa's expression, visible faintly through the video feed, softened slightly. "Perhaps you're right, Captain, though I suspect such peace will not come easily, nor quickly." "No," Elena agreed, "but most things worth achieving rarely do." In the days that followed, the Reckoning withdrew from the Sol system, its mission altered, though not entirely abandoned. Threxa carried with her detailed logs of everything that had transpired, evidence of both the Dominion's vulnerability and humanity's unexpected resilience. Whether the Council would heed her warnings or dismiss them out of pride remained uncertain, but for the first time, a Dominion commander had chosen understanding over blind destruction, if only in a small way. Aboard the Kestrel, Elena guided her ship back toward the remnants of Earth's defense fleet, carrying invaluable data about Dominion technology, weaknesses, and behavior that would prove critical in the years of conflict still ahead. Her crew, exhausted but proud, understood they had accomplished something far greater than simply surviving an encounter with the galaxy's most powerful warship. They had proven that even against overwhelming force, patience, intelligence, and unwavering resolve, could shift the balance of an impossible fight. News of the encounter spread quickly through Earth's scattered defense network, inspiring both hope and renewed determination among a species that had spent years fighting simply to survive. The story of how a small, aging human vessel had trapped and outmaneuvered the Dominion's greatest warship became something more than just a military victory. It became a symbol, proof that humanity's strength had never truly come from advanced technology or overwhelming firepower, but from the refusal to give up, no matter how impossible the odds appeared. Elena Reyes stood on the bridge of the Kestrel many weeks later, watching Earth's blue and green surface come back into view as her ship approached its home world. Behind her, Jonah, Marcus, and the rest of her small, weary crew gathered quietly, each lost in their own thoughts about everything they had endured. "You know," Jonah said eventually, breaking the comfortable silence, "when this is all over, historians are going to write about what we did out there." Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile. Maybe, or maybe it'll just be another story people tell their kids someday. A reminder that even the smallest ship, crewed by the most stubborn people, can still stand against the biggest threats the galaxy has to offer. As the Kestrel descended toward Earth's atmosphere, carrying with it the hard-won knowledge that would shape humanity's future struggles against the Dominion, Elena Reyes allowed herself, for the first time in a long while, to feel something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Far away, aboard the Reckoning, Commander Threxa Call stood silently at her viewport as her ship carried her back toward Dominion space, carrying with her not just data and reports, but a newfound understanding of an enemy she had once dismissed as insignificant. Whether her warnings would be heeded, or whether the Dominion Council would choose pride over wisdom, remained uncertain. But for the first time in her long career, Threxa found herself hoping that when the Dominion's next fleet eventually returned to Earth, it would come not as conquerors seeking destruction, but as equals seeking understanding. The war between humanity and the Dominion was far from over. But thanks to the courage of one small human ship, and the unexpected wisdom of one Dominion commander willing to question her own certainty, the path forward had, if only slightly, begun to change. And sometimes, in the vast, unforgiving darkness of space, a slight change in course was enough to alter the fate of entire worlds. 6 weeks later, Elena stood before a crowded assembly hall, deep within one of Earth's largest remaining underground command centers, facing a panel of exhausted, skeptical military and civilian leaders who had gathered to hear her full report firsthand. The story of the Kestrel's encounter with the Reckoning had already spread through informal channels, growing more exaggerated with each retelling, and Elena had insisted on setting the record straight herself. "I want to be clear about something," she said, standing before the assembled leaders. "We did not defeat the Dominion. We did not destroy their warship. What we did was survive an encounter that should have ended in our destruction, and in doing so, we learned things about our enemy that could change how we fight this war going forward." A stern-faced admiral near the front, General Marcus Webb, leaned forward. "You allowed a Dominion warship to leave without attempting to destroy it, despite having it trapped and vulnerable. Many would call that a missed opportunity, Captain Reyes, perhaps even a dereliction of duty." Elena had expected this criticism and met it calmly. "General, even trapped, the Reckoning's weapons could have inflicted serious damage on my ship at any point during the standoff. We lacked the firepower to destroy it outright, even immobilized. Attempting a full assault would likely have resulted in our destruction without meaningfully harming their vessel. Instead, we used the time to gather intelligence, technical data on their shield frequencies, their engine capabilities, their internal command structure, information that will prove far more valuable to Earth's long-term survival than a single, likely unsuccessful attack." She gestured toward Marcus, standing quietly nearby with a data tablet full of technical findings. "Lieutenant Chen has compiled a full report on the vulnerabilities we discovered. Given time, this information could help our engineers develop countermeasures against Dominion shielding technology across our entire fleet, not just against a single ship." The assembly fell into murmured discussion as officials reviewed the data being distributed among them. Slowly, the tone in the room began to shift from skepticism toward cautious interest. "And this matter of open communication with an enemy commander?" another official asked, a civilian representative named Dr. Yuki Tanaka. Do you believe this represents a genuine opportunity, or simply a temporary anomaly born from an unusual set of circumstances? Elena considered the question carefully before answering. I believe the Dominion is not as unified as we've always assumed. We recovered a young crew member during the standoff, conscripted from a conquered world, serving not out of loyalty, but out of fear for his family's safety. Commander Kahl herself expressed doubts about her council's approach, choosing honesty over easy deception, even when it risked her own position. I can't promise this represents a widespread crack in the Dominion's foundation, but I believe it's a possibility worth exploring further, rather than dismissing outright. The debate continued for hours, some officials remaining firmly skeptical of any approach beyond continued military resistance, others intrigued by the possibility of exploiting divisions within the Dominion's own ranks. No firm consensus was reached that day, but Elena left the assembly hall with something she hadn't expected, a genuine, if cautious, willingness among Earth's leadership to consider approaches beyond simple survival and desperate resistance. Word of the Reckoning's report eventually reached the highest levels of Dominion leadership as well, sparking fierce debate within the council chamber, where Lord Vesic Thorn had first proposed sending the mighty warship to destroy Earth. She failed, Kalira Voss declared during a heated session, reviewing Threx's detailed account. The Reckoning was humiliated by a single primitive vessel, and rather than reasserting Dominion authority through overwhelming force, Commander Kahl chose to negotiate, to show mercy, to question our judgment. This is precisely the kind of weakness that emboldens rebellious species throughout our empire. Lord Vesic, however, studied the report with far more measured consideration, particularly the sections detailing the anomaly trap and the surprising sophistication of human strategic thinking. Or, he said slowly, Commander Kahl recognized reality when others among us continue to deny it. This species defeated 3 ships at Krill, through cunning alone. They trapped our greatest warship using nothing more than knowledge of their local environment and a keen understanding of our own predictable pride. Perhaps the lesson here is not about weakness, but about the danger of underestimating an enemy simply because their weapons are less advanced than our own. The debate stretched across multiple sessions, the council deeply divided on how to respond. Some demanded an even larger fleet be dispatched immediately to erase the humiliation and complete Earth's destruction without delay. Others, swayed by Vesic's arguments and the undeniable technical data included in Threx's report, urged caution, suggesting further study before committing additional forces to a species that had already proven far more dangerous than initially believed. In the end, no immediate invasion fleet was dispatched. The council remained locked in uncertainty, buying Earth something it desperately needed: time. Threxa herself faced an uncertain fate following her honest report, summoned before the council to answer for her decision not to destroy the human vessel when she'd had the opportunity. She stood before the assembled lords with the same steady composure she had carried throughout her long military career, refusing to offer excuses or false regret for her choices. I made the decision I believed was correct, given everything I observed, she told the council. Destroying that single vessel would have satisfied pride, nothing more. It would not have changed the deeper truth my report reveals, that Earth possesses capabilities and resolve, far beyond what our intelligence previously indicated. I would rather the Dominion enter any future conflict with this species fully informed, than blind and confident as we were when the Reckoning first departed for Sol. Whether her words would ultimately save her position remained uncertain, as the council session ended without a final verdict. But Threxa left the chamber with no regret for the choices she had made in the depths of the Ashfall expanse. Back on Earth, months passed as the planet's scattered defense forces slowly began incorporating the technical knowledge gained from the encounter, developing new shield-disrupting technology based on the vulnerabilities Marcus had identified, training tactical teams in strategies that emphasized patience, environment, and creative thinking over direct confrontation with superior firepower. Elena remained in command of the Kestrel, though the ship underwent significant repairs and upgrades using resources allocated after her report's reception. Sophia, the young engineer, proudly oversaw the installation of new reinforced plating along the hull, while Marcus continued analyzing the wealth of data gathered during those tense days, trapped alongside the Reckoning. One evening, months after their return, Elena found herself standing on an observation deck overlooking what remained of a rebuilt coastal city. watching the sun set behind skeletal remains of buildings still being slowly restored. Her daughter Mia stood beside her, having been allowed a rare visit topside from the underground shelters. "Mom," Mia asked quietly, watching the horizon, "do you think it'll ever really be over? The war, I mean." Elena considered the question carefully, thinking of everything that had happened in the Ashfall expanse, the strange, unexpected understanding that had briefly formed between herself and an alien commander who could have easily destroyed her ship without a second thought. "I don't know if it'll ever be completely over," she said honestly, "but I think, maybe, it doesn't have to end the way we always assumed it would. Maybe there's more room for something different than just endless fighting." Mia looked up at her mother, curious. "What do you mean?" Elena smiled softly, thinking of Ryle's quiet gratitude, of Threxa's unexpected mercy, of the small, fragile seeds of understanding planted during those tense days, trapped among the stars. "I mean that even the biggest, strongest enemies are still made up of individuals," Elena said. "Individuals capable of doubt, of change, of choosing a different path than the one they were told to follow. That doesn't mean the fight is over, but it means the future isn't as fixed as we sometimes believe." As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting the last golden light across the rebuilding city, Elena Reyes allowed herself, once again, to hold on to that fragile, hard-won hope, the belief that even in a galaxy dominated by an empire built on conquest and unquestioned strength, small acts of courage and understanding could still shift the course of history. The reckoning would return to Dominion space carrying more than just data and reports. It would carry the beginning of a question the Dominion Council had never truly considered before, whether the endless cycle of conquest was truly their only path forward. And on Earth, humanity would continue building, preparing, and hoping, carrying forward the lesson learned deep within the Ashfall expanse, that even against the mightiest warship ever built, patience, courage, and the refusal to surrender could still change the fate of an entire world. A year after the encounter, Elena stood once more on the bridge of the Kestrel, now fitted with upgraded shields and weapon systems built directly from lessons learned during those tense days trapped alongside the reckoning. Her crew had grown too, new faces joining the veterans who had survived the original encounter, all of them trained in the patient, creative tactics that had once seemed like desperate improvisation, but were now becoming a genuine doctrine within Earth's rebuilding defense forces. Sophia, no longer the nervous young engineer she had been during that first tense mission, now led her own small team responsible for training new recruits in the delicate art of using environmental hazards against pursuing enemy ships. Marcus had been promoted to head a growing research division dedicated entirely to studying captured Dominion technology and communications intercepted from other encounters across the system, building on the foundation laid during those critical days of observation. News had reached them, through channels still fragile and uncertain, that Commander Threxa Call remained in service, though quietly reassigned to a research and diplomatic division within the Dominion military, a role Elena suspected was both a punishment and, in its own strange way, an acknowledgement that her instincts during the Ashfall encounter had proven more valuable than her superiors were willing to openly admit. Whether the two of them would ever cross paths again remained uncertain, but Elena often found herself wondering about the alien commander who had chosen understanding over easy victory when it mattered most. The war with the Dominion continued, as both captains had known it would. Skirmishes still flared along the edges of human territory, and the Greater Council remained divided on how to ultimately deal with a species that had proven far more resilient and clever than their initial assessments suggested. But something had shifted in the years since the Reckoning's brief captivity, a growing recognition among at least some in Dominion leadership that conquest through overwhelming force alone might not be the only path forward, and a growing confidence among humanity's defenders that even the largest, most powerful threats could be met with patience, ingenuity, and courage. Standing on the bridge of her ship, watching the stars stretch out before her, Elena Reyes thought again of that pivotal moment when a small, aging vessel had guided the galaxy's most feared warship into a trap built from nothing more than careful study and stubborn hope. It had not ended the war. It had not saved every life still hanging in the balance, but it had proven, beyond any doubt, that humanity's fight was far from over, and that the future, however uncertain, remained theirs to shape. The Kestrel sailed onward into the dark, carrying forward the lesson its crew had learned in the depths of the ashfall expanse, a lesson that would echo through every battle still to come, that even against impossible odds, the smallest ship, guided by the right courage and the right mind, could still change the course of history.